Hey there, and welcome to the Psych Leadership Podcast, the podcast that helps you understand the psychology of growth, leadership, and making big moves in your life and career. I'm your host, Luke Upchurch, and today we're diving into something that shapes more of our lives than any of us seem to realize: habits. So, why is it that some people seem to stick easily to routines, whether it's studying, exercising, or managing their time? And then other folks start to fall off after about a week. The answer lies in the psychology of habits. And today we're going to break that down a little bit. We're going to get into the science behind how we form habits, why they often fail, and most importantly, how you can build a habit that actually lasts. So, why do habits matter in the first place? So, let's start with the big picture. Habits matter because they automate our daily lives. Psychologists use the term automacity, I believe is how that's pronounced, to describe how a behavior becomes habitual. It no longer requires a conscious effort. So, an example of this, think of something like brushing your teeth. You don't have to convince yourself every morning to do it. Well, maybe. I mean, if you're depending on your age, I think any of us that are parents out there have probably dealt with that from our children from time to time. But in theory, as you become an adult, that becomes a habit. Okay, you don't have to convince yourself every morning that you need to brush your teeth. You just do it, and it frees up your mental energy for more difficult decisions. As a college student or a young professional, this is a game changer. If you want to make studying, budgeting, or networking into a habit, you don't waste so that you don't waste your energy deciding whether or not you want to do it, right? You just simply follow through. In psychology, we know that willpower is a limited resource. Habits are how you bypass that drain on your resource. So that's why this is an important topic, especially building upon some of the stuff that we've talked about in our last couple podcasts here. If you recall, and I hope that you've listened to those. But as here recently, we started kind of a new direction. We were focused on this podcast on small business and folks that were relatively new in career. We're still kind of focused on the new in career piece, but leaning more towards college and high school students. So we've took a little bit of a pivot. But our first episode on that journey was talking about finding your footing as your new in career. And then we dove into the concept of imposter syndrome and how do you overcome that? How do you reframe your mindset so that imposter syndrome is not something that holds you back, but just something that you learn to deal with, no different than anything else? Well, building on those concepts, now we get into habits. So, the most popular model for understanding habits actually comes from a gentleman by the name of Charles Duhigg. That's Duhiggs, Charles Duhigg. And the book is called The Power of Habit. And he talks about this concept called a habit loop. And there are three major parts that he discusses in his book. The first one is the cue. So, this is the trigger that starts the behavior. Then you have the routine itself. This is the behavior, right? The thing that you're trying to do habitually. And then you have the reward, so a benefit after you've completed the task. So let me give you an example here. Let's say that your alarm goes off at 6:30 in the morning. That's when you normally get up for work, we'll just say. That's your cue. You put on your running shoes, you go for a jog, or you get dressed, straighten up that tie, or, in today's work at home mantra, maybe that just means you put on your mullet attire. For those of you not familiar with the work at home nomenclature, that a mullet attire is where your business up top, but party down low, right? I know any of my business professional friends are thinking the exact same thing, right? I personally have been working at home for 11 years, and I can't tell you how many times that I've had a polo shirt on while I have gym shorts on. But in any case, your alarm goes off, you get dressed, you put on your running shoes, you go for a jog, right? That's the routine. The boost that you feel in that example, if you're going for a jog, say, the boost that you feel, the endorphins, the pride afterwards, that's the reward. So over time, the brain starts to anticipate the reward whenever it notices the cue. This is operant conditioning at its core. That's a principle in by psychologist B.F. Skinner. It comes into play here because we are conditioning our mind that when this cue happens, I'm going to do this action, and that is going to give me some sort of reward. The science behind the loop: rewards reinforce behavior. So why do habits fail then? I mean, that seems pretty simple, right? I have a cue, I do the thing, I get a reward. It seems pretty simple, but the reason that habits fail is that habits are easy to break and hard to form. Well, there's a few reasons for that. First off, we rely too much on willpower, but willpower is finite. It drains just like a battery. Another reason that habits fail, is sometimes we start too big. So instead of deciding that we're going to jump into a workout plan, for example, how many of you thought about either a workout plan or a study habits or something along those lines, and we get this big number in our head, right? Like, I need to run 5 miles, or I need to study for 3 hours a night. Well, that's overwhelming. We really should start a little bit smaller and build from there. So study for 15 minutes, run for a quarter mile, something like that, instead of going big right away. And then oftentimes our rewards are delayed. So good habits like exercising, saving money, those can pay off in a couple weeks, right? If you're trying to lose weight, you didn't gain the weight overnight. You're sure as hell not going to lose it overnight. And so those rewards tend to be delayed. Bad habits like scrolling through TikTok pay off instantly with dopamine. And so psychologists explain this concept called temporal discounting. Our brains value immediate reward more than future ones. And that's why it's so much easier to choose Netflix now instead of studying for exam that's 2 weeks away, right? We're actually hardwired there to want that instant gratification. And especially in a world that is built on that, where, social media floods the brain with dopamine, and I can instantly watch whatever movie I was craving on Netflix or something like that. It's a little hard to swap that out and say, no, brain, I need you to wait 2 weeks to study for this exam now and get the reward of the good grade in 2 weeks from now. Take a jog now, and maybe your pant size goes down a few pounds in a month or two, right? Behavioral economics back this up. Humans are wired to prefer short-term gratification, even if it undermines our long-term success. All right. So how do we build habits then that last long? So what can you do to create a habit that sticks? If we look at research in behavioral psychology and self-regulation theory, we get a couple hints at this. So first off, there's a gentleman by the name of B.J. Foggs, and he has a research methodology around something he calls tiny habits. So his research shows that starting with something small, so small that it almost feels silly, like flossing one tooth or reading one page, makes you more likely to succeed. Once the behavior sticks, then you can expand it. Anchor habits to existing routines is another method that you can use. So some people also refer to this as what's called habit stacking. So an example is after I brush my teeth, I can write down one thing that I'm grateful for. So you already have the cue there. The cue is kind of built into the behavior. You didn't need to remind yourself to brush your teeth, and so that's automatic, right? That's almost an autonomous unconscious behavior. You go through the motions, but then that becomes the cue for the next thing, to write down something that you're grateful for. You can also design your environment. So in psychology, cues are more powerful than motivation. If you want to eat healthy, put fruit on a container and put that right there in your fridge, and maybe even hide the chips. Or I don't know about you, if you hide them, I'm still going to find those potato chips. The best bet is just to not buy them in the first place, right? But if fruit is easily accessible, I'm probably going to go for that anyway, just out of sheer convenience. Remember, we talked about the mind wants instant gratification, right? If I have to work a little harder for the potato chips, work a little harder for the junk food that's bad for me, and the easy stuff, the easy button is the healthy food, I'm probably going to do that, right? If you want to study, set out your laptop and your notes right before you go to bed. So set that stuff out so that it is an immediate cue in the morning. You see that, and that also helps to kind of jog the memory and almost guilt you into doing the thing that you were planning on doing. I would also encourage you then to use immediate rewards. So this combats that temporal discounting. So for example, checking off a habit tracker. Celebrate with something as simple as, a high five to your colleague or something like that. It seems so rudimentary, but your brain needs a reward. And you're teaching your brain here that routine pays off now, not later, but immediately. And then I'd encourage you to plan for setbacks. So a relapse is not a failure. It's part of the process. So relapse isn't failure. Psychologist Peter Gottweiler's concept of implementation intentions help here. If you make an if plan, like if I missed a workout, then I'll do a 10-minute extra walk next morning. You're less likely to spiral into quitting. You're almost giving yourself um a condition here. It's still a type of conditioning in this case. It's not negative conditioning because you're not taking something away, but it's still giving yourself an incentive to say, well, my workout's going to be harder if I skip it on a day. Okay. So think through those kind of things that will help you out. So in closing, couple takeaways for you. Habits shape who you become far more than one-time decisions. If you can identify your cues, design your environment, and reinforce behaviors with rewards, you'll set yourself up for success, not just in college, but in career and ultimately in life. I'll leave you with this challenge. Pick a small habit that you want to build out this week. Keep it simple. Anchor it to something that you're already doing and track your progress. You might be surprised at how quickly this grows. All right. So, with that, folks, thank you for listening to this episode of the Psych Leadership Podcast. If you found this helpful, share it with a friend, write us a review, or better yet, think of a donation to Rise Up Academics. I hope you have a great day. We'll talk again soon. Bye bye. Hey, you made it all the way to the end of the podcast. Thanks so much for your time today. If you like this content, I'm going to ask that you consider a small donation. Every little bit helps, but this allows us to continue not only doing the podcast, but actually offering the internship positions, the leadership conferences, as well as the in-person courses that we deliver to high school and college students. Think about hitting the donation button for me. And again, we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.